What's up, everybody? Welcome to a new edition of the By the Horns podcast presented by Toyota. Toyota has more all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive vehicles than any other brand, so find yours and shine on. Toyota, let's go places. Cam Smith rocking with my man K.C. Johnson, Bulls CHSN Insider. K.C., great to see you. I know it was a rough night last night, just in terms of what we saw on the court and then just, trying to get back. And we're going to unpack all of that stuff, man. It was one of those things where, when it comes to movies, we talk about this, like the sequel is always worse than the original. And it felt like that was the case last night for the Bulls against the Pacers. And let me preface this by saying the Bulls coming into that ball game had won 4 of the last 5, coming off of back-to-back wins against the Knicks on Derrick Rose night this past Saturday. Obviously, the comeback win against the San Antonio Spurs on Monday that culminated with Kobe White's dunk on Victor Wembanyama. I think it's number 1 for dunk of the year because it's a guard dunking on Victor Wembanyama. So you have that energy entering Gainesbridge Fieldhouse against the Pacers. And knowing what we saw a little bit over a month ago when these two teams met at the United Center and how it was just Indiana, really TJ McConnell looking like Bob Cousy out there, just running circles around this Bulls team in that double-digit loss. And you would think that this Bulls team will remember that and pair it with the energy of them winning back-to-back games, that they would get their lick back against the Indiana Pacers. But it was the exact opposite, Casey.
Yeah, and to your point, Cam, the post-game conversation in the media room centered amongst the Chicago Tribune, the Chicago Sun-Times, and the Chicago Sports Network was, is this drive worth it? We all drove 6 hours. Julia Poe, Joe Colley, and I drove 6 hours separately, 3 hours down, 3 hours back. And we're like, was this worth it? And the consensus was no, because that was a bad basketball game last night, at least from one side. Obviously, the Pacers played well. And you kind of nail it. I mean, we saw this movie in Washington. I think it was a little bit different in the sense that in this case, I really do think it was Indiana kind of taking the Bulls out of their game. There were some unforced errors, some really bad turnovers early by Patrick Williams and Josh Giddey. But Indiana defends, and they defend very physically. And, McConnell was the star of the game in Chicago. He barely played last night because, Andrew Nebhard is back, and he is such a baller. I love the way he plays. He is such a physical, a pesky defender. And look, they played without Miles Turner and did not miss a beat. Thomas Bryant had a big game. I just felt like the Bulls were a step slow from the jump. They obviously played better in the second half than the first half, limited their turnovers, shot the ball well, over 50%. But when you dig that kind of hole and don't respond to the physicality early, especially when you're playing on the road, you're going to let the other team get comfortable, and that's what the Pacers did.
Yeah, and the Pacers knew right away like what it was against this Bulls team. It's like, okay, we thought that they were going to come out with some get back, a little, more energy with themselves on the defensive end and also offensively, but it really wasn't the case for that. So I'm just thinking about UKC on the drive back home, not to Indianapolis, but back home. What was the playlist? Did you have a certain playlist that you were listening to? Did it get really like mellow and like really thought-provoking music that you were playing on the ride back?
I went podcast to engage the brain. So I am a big music guy, mostly indie rock, but I was catching up on some a music podcast on the way back, so I didn't go off the road into a cornfield in Indiana because it was pretty late, pretty cold, and pretty despondent on the drive back. So thanks for checking on me, Cam.
No doubt, KC. Look, man, protecting your mental health, man, because if you stayed and like dove into like that depressing type, melancholy music, then I don't know if we would be doing this podcast right now. So I'm glad that you entered an entirely different world and into the music world just to get your mind away. So we can get into this conversation. But and to your point, and that's one thing that I really want to highlight with this Bulls team. And actually, before I highlight that, just more so is I know the NBA, obviously 82 games, you have your ebbs and flows. It's a long season. But for this team, we've seen it time and time again, KC, where it feels like they build momentum in terms of wins, guys playing well. You see the connectivity offensively. They do it for a couple of games, maybe 3 games, right? But there's always a step backwards for this team. And it's not even just a small step, it's a giant step backwards to what they've built and what they've created. And it feels like they have to really revive that moving forward because it could get, speaking of dark, it could get dark when you look at just how this team sometimes is inconsistent. So for me, that's the confusing thing entering last night's ball game against Indiana. You mentioned this, Miles Turner being out. I mean, that's one of the best shot blockers that we have in the NBA. And so it will feel like you would want to have a concerted effort to give the basketball to Nikola Vucevic. And this is no disrespect to Thomas Bryant, a guy that's been in the league nearly a decade and has been a very serviceable pro in his multiple stops, whether being thrust into a starting lineup like we saw last night with the Pacers or in his role off the bench to help secure and just bring physicality to the front court. But when you have a little bit over a month ago, December 6th, with the Bulls and Nikola Vucevic only having 11 shot attempts, and then last night he only has 9 shot attempts, and it felt like Vooch was at times just out there on the court. And not to say that he was just not enthused or engaged, but he would post and have opportunities, but he just wouldn't get the basketball. What do you make of this situation with this team when it comes to not finding Vooch in his spots or really just playing through him, especially when you have an opponent that doesn't have one of their best defenders at the rim on the floor?
Three points to that. First of all, I think they've actually gotten significantly better. I think last season this was far more of a widespread issue. And again, this is not a knock against DeMar, but I mean, he obviously pounds the ball a lot. He's in ISO a lot and kind of working in some of the sometimes the same space as Vucevic from that mid-range down in. So I do think it was more of an issue last season. I think the Bulls have gotten much better, and Vucevic's numbers speak to that. Number two, and I will agree with you on my third point, but the first 2 points kind of absolved the Bulls from last night. The number two, I actually think the Pacers were so physical on the perimeter that the Bulls were having trouble making entry passes. I think they just I think the Pacers perimeter defense was really bothering the Bulls ball distributors, and so and then third thing is like, Vooch was in one of his moods last night where he gets frustrated early. He was like muttering in Serbian already in the first quarter. I tweeted like there was a call that he thought the officials missed that you could see got into his head a little bit. But yes, he was frustrated last night and he did not have a big game. And you're right, Bryant, I mean, very solid NBA backup, but is a backup and also likes to be on the perimeter more. You know, obviously hit a couple threes last night. So missed opportunity. I think, like I said before, I think the Bulls just kind of got off their game in that first quarter. And although they played better in the second half, I think the tone was set in that first quarter.
All right. So I love those points, KC, especially when it comes to just Indiana's physicality on the perimeter with their guards. I mean, they forced the Bulls into 11 turnovers, some kind of uncharacteristic for this Bulls team. And we talk about TJ McConnell, just him being sneaky in certain situations when the Bulls inbounding the basketball and just sneaking up and getting steals. So you have that, and then trying to have some type of spark off of the bench, right? And I think that's been the search for Billy Donovan with this team, and you would have guys stepping up in certain situations. But more so where I'm going with this conversation and to transition is looking at Matas Buzelis and just, you know, what he's been lately, right? Obviously, rookie, still learning his ways, but it hasn't been the Matas that we've seen in terms of when Patrick Williams was out and he had those moments where offensively he showed that spark and then defensively got better for himself. So what do you make of what's going on with Matas lately?
Well, I've actually been meaning to catch up with him, and I haven't had a chance to because I want to ask him flat out. I think I know him well enough already to kind of know how he'll answer this, but I want to ask him about the rookie wall because it is real and it is legit, and players can downplay it all the time, and I guarantee that's what Matas will do because he's got a defiant streak to him, which I like, and he's got a confidence streak with him. To him that I like. But what I see, and you saw it last night with Billy Donovan going to Julian Phillips ahead of him in the rotation, what I see is a coaching staff that is shortening his leash. And I see a guy that's kind of trying to – his minutes have definitely dropped since that December stretch where he was getting more regular minutes. Look, man, he's at game 36, 37, and I know he was with G League Ignite last year, which is a taste of the pro life, but that season got shut down early. Right. He's a 20-year-old kid. He's physically needs to grow. And I'm not saying any of this like critically. This is just facts. This is how it is for the NBA. And I've covered enough rookies to see, you know, early, mid-January, this stuff starts to get real. So I do want to, you know, we can probably have a part 2 of this conversation at some point where I get a chance to catch up with him and talk to him about this and see how he responds to it. I don't want to speak for him. This is just my opinions, what I'm seeing. And then also having talked to Billy Donovan. Billy Donovan actually brought this up unsolicited 2 or 3 games ago where he said, you know, this is a lot for these guys. he didn't use the words rookie wall, but that's certainly what he was referring to.
Yeah.
You can just see it by Billy's actions. I mean, Matas, I've said this before. I like how the coaching staff is handling Matas. They are not giving him entitlement minutes, even though fans are clamoring for that, because they feel like development can take place in other forms, sitting and watching, film study, practice, walkthroughs, shoot-arounds, extra work, eating right, sleep habits, all of it that comes with being an NBA professional. Yeah. So that part I like. On the court, obviously you'd like to see him kind of get back to that rhythm that we saw in December, where we were talking pretty consistently positively about him, and we have not done that of late.
Yeah, and I wonder if you agree with me on this one with the position that he plays. To me, it's the toughest position to defend in the NBA, right? And you have a guy that, as a 20-year-old rookie, physically, obviously, he has to get strong and mature in that standpoint. But it's not, forgiving in the NBA when you have to face off against forwards on a night in, night out basis. Obviously, you look at that towards the end of December stretch for Matas and facing off against the Boston Celtics a couple of times, the Milwaukee Bucks, and then you fast forward to what we've seen earlier part of this month and just, the New York Knicks. And even though it's the Wizards, but still they have some guys at that forward position, young guys that are very just energetic and athletic and trying to prove their points. And it's the same thing with the San Antonio Spurs. And of course, we saw it last night with the Indiana Pacers, where it's really no off night for that forward position. And I think for him, obviously moving forward with the film study and understanding, the do's and don'ts for him and what his role is and the expectation is, that he'll grow with that. But it feels like he's run smack into that rookie wall for sure, like Looney Tune level, where the body is face up and smacked up against a brick wall.
Yeah, I mean, he hasn't played. I'm looking at it right here. He hasn't played more than 20 minutes since December 21st. So we're talking 10, almost 3 weeks. He hasn't played more than 20 minutes. So that to me, he played 2 minutes against the Knicks.
Yeah, I was just looking at that. Yeah,
and so you're seeing it in the coaching staff. And I've talked to a couple coaches behind the scenes about it, and they said, look, I mean, this is part of it. I mean, and when you said the position, it's actually twofold. Not only how demanding it is, but also from an internal perspective, that's also a position where the Bulls have multiple development projects on their hands. And Patrick Williams, Julian Phillips, Matas Buzelis, Billy's alluded to that many times. There's going to have to be sacrifice. And right now, there were times where Julian had the shorter leash and Matas got to run a little bit. And right now, that's kind of flip-flopped. And obviously Patrick is the starter, although he obviously really struggled last night. And we talked to him post-game about just how much it's difficult for him to find his spots when his three-point shot isn't falling. But yeah, the Matas thing is not surprising, but certainly notable for sure.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Something that's also notable more on the positive side is Zach and just the run that he's been on. Not even just the last few games. And I'll throw out the numbers. I mean, 4 straight games of 30 or more points. Like, this is a guy that's in the same category with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Nikola Vucevic, of guys that have scored 30 or more in 4 straight games. But also it's just been from the beginning, KC, and the consistency of Zach getting himself to a point where he came into the season, and we've talked about this. We've had conversations respectively with Zach on and off camera about what his role will be, how he's feeling, what that mindset is. Obviously, coming into the season with the rumors and his name being on trade rumors and things like that. But you said this, and I love that you said this. You have to commend Zach for how he's handled himself as a teammate, individually, mentally, and also physically, because he's been playing all-star level basketball, and last night was another example of that. So when you look at what Zach has been able to contribute, especially just the timing of his impact on games, how special has he been?
Yeah, I mean, I tweeted recently, he's a player at peace. That's kind of the soundbite that I use for him. I mean, and you can just feel it. I kind of feel like I'm a Zach expert, having covered his entire career. I've just seen the ebbs and flows of his tenure here, and he's just at easily one of the best places I've seen him since he's been here. And I like you just said, I mean, I've talked to him many times publicly, but also many times privately, and he's just in a really, really good place. And I said this on the broadcast last night. 2 things that have really jumped out to me. I should have it in front of me. I don't. I don't think he got to the line a lot last night. But prior to last night, he'd been getting to the line more of late, so that's helped his surge. I mean, obviously his shooting percentage is ridiculous. Yeah. The other thing that he told me that he's really worked on is his 3-point shot off the dribble. He's always been an elite catch and shoot 3-point artist, but I really think that was a major part of his offseason focus was improving his 3-point shot off the dribble. And you've seen him dribble up and sometimes just walk into those and shoot them off the bounce coming up the court. And look, that's a good shot for Zach LaVine. His true shooting percentage, last I checked, is over 64%. It's just insane, the heater he's on. And he really, the best part is that I've talked to other teammates about this, including Kobe White and Nikola Vucevic. He's doing it without, he's not going into ISO mode very much. I mean, he can do it every once in a while because he's Zach LaVine and he's got that skill, but he's really doing most of this by reading what the defense is giving him and, getting off the ball at the right times. He's having a really good season. His sense of humor is intact. I was asking him about the heater, that he's on recently. He goes, "Yeah, just think if I made some dunks," because he was Knicks. So, man, he's in a good place. And I've said this many times. I'm probably in the minority here. I think they'd be crazy to trade him. I know he's out there. My feeling on that is if you trade Zach LaVine, you're just hoping whoever you get in the draft is as good as Zach LaVine, right? I mean, it's like the dude is a very, very good NBA player, and that's just my personal opinion. And I think I'm in the minority amongst the organization. So,
KC, man, people are going to be coming at you with the mentions, but I mean, I'm with you on that because you have again a guy that is once again proven, and he's always known this, and you've known this, I've known this as well. He's one of the elite scorers in the NBA. So if he is traded, then it's going to be a great benefit to wherever he goes. But still, when you have him on this Bulls team, just think about just if you take that production, just that type of player, that caliber, just the amount and really how he impacts games in those crucial moments. If you take that away from this Bulls team, those scores are a lot different. I mean, it's going to force guys into situations where they have to grow and mature a lot quicker than expected. So I think that's another thing with Zach and what he's been able to do just from himself from an individual standpoint of just lessening the pressure on other guys to really continue to uplift their offensive input or just their production in general on the court. So you talked about just him really not being able to make those dunks and him saying that. It was kind of funny in that standpoint. And it's not because of lack of effort, because I'm thinking about San Antonio. I mean, he had some dunks that he missed there. But I love that you highlighted what he's able to do with his pull-up three. And that was really on display on Monday against the Spurs. And with Chicago Sports Network and the show that I'm on, the Chicago Lead, we had the ISO Cam segment. And one of the plays was Zach in those final 4 minutes, those final few minutes, coming down after assisting to Nikola Vucevic in the corner for three, just a simple basketball play, right? Attack the middle, had Victor Wembanyama cheat in a little bit and found Vooch on a timely kick out 4-3, but then that next possession down for the Bulls offensively for himself in transition, full speed, a little in and out dribble and just raising up and shooting. And I was trying to explain this for people when I was doing my ISOCAM segment, KC. You know this, and I know this as well as hoopers. Like, that's one of the more difficult shots to try and pull off and make, especially in that situation, like with this Bulls team. I mean, they were down four. It was 110-106 San Antonio. And in transition, you would think, all right, let's slow it down, make it a half-court game. Let's grind this possession out, or at least find something to where we don't force anything. And not to say that Zach's pull-up three was a force, but it was right in rhythm. But it's just such a difficult shot to make. And he knocked it down and tried it back like, hey, have you guys not been watching me all season? Like, I've been knocking this shot down consistently in so many ways.
Yeah, and that's funny you say that about the looking at you, because like when I asked him recently about how this hot streak he's on, you know, Zach's so supremely confident. He kind of looked at me like I was from Mars. Like, haven't you watched me? I mean, like, I can score. You know, like, why are you asking me about my scoring? And I love that about him. But yeah, I mean, look, every player, even great ones or great scorers, need to add something to their game. And he did tell me that was an off-season focus, was shooting off the bounce from three. I did just look up his true shooting. He still is over 64%, which is
still amazing.
Career high, and it's absolutely insane. His previous career high is 63.4. Wow. I mean, I don't know, man.
I
I understand that. I understand the Bulls are trying to make changes, and you can make the argument he hasn't impacted winning or what have you. But I saw him win a gold medal with Team USA. He can play on a winning basketball team. I've made my feelings about Zach known pretty consistently over the years. I just think if you trade him, you're basically looking for someone to be as good as him. He's really, really good, and he's more committed defensively this year. It's really cool to see him kind of wherever this leads between now and the February trade deadline. It's really cool to see him kind of reclaim his standing and his personality, because last year that's not the Zach that I knew. I was as critical on him as anybody last year. He was not in a great headspace. He obviously was frustrated about being hurt. I mean, I will give him credit for this. He's always tried to play through injuries. He played with a floating bone in his foot before he had surgery, and that was not diagnosed properly initially. And we were all criticizing him for being a below the rim player early in the season. Well, he had a floating bone in his foot, so that's why he was a below the rim player. But in general, that was not the Zach that I know, and the Zach that I have gotten to know is back this year, both on and off the court.
Yeah, and I love that you said when just talking to him, just you see him and he's at peace, and also he's just like simplified the game too, right? And I think for yourself to be able to simplify things, especially on the offensive end, it just it allows you to flow easier, right? And again, it's just when you have the elite scoring ability that Zach has, it's a lot easier to simplify the games compared to other guys as well. So shout out to Zach LaVine and doing his thing for sure, and getting more respect on his name if there wasn't any respect on his name. And KC, look, I'll join you in the fire, man. They should keep him. I'm with East 29 moving forward. So you got me on tape. We're on the By the Horns podcast. So you see our handles that are popped up, and Edgar Perez, our great producer for the By the Horn podcast and all the podcasts on the Chicago Sports Network, is putting them up. There they are. We're ready for the smoke. And me and KC will go back to back like it's bad boys, like with Martin Lawrence and Will Smith, and get these things handled. But Zach LaVine for sure at 29, and what we've seen is a guy that you should try to keep on your roster. But it's a lot of time left before the February 6th trade deadline. If he is moved, then God bless that team that's going to pick up Zach LaVine, because the headspace that he's in, how his game is clicking, his true shooting percentage, as Casey said, a career high. He's really just playing some great basketball, all-star level basketball. So shout out to Zach LaVine. And one shout out to Taylor Horton-Tucker, who yesterday his contract became finalized and guaranteed for the remainder of the season, which is great for THT. KC, a guy coming in the training camp that wasn't guaranteed a roster spot. Chicago's own. We've had our moments in talking about THT and what he's been able to do in certain moments off the bench, sometimes in rotations, especially in crucial moments. So just one shout out to Taylor Horton-Tucker, Simeon's finest.
Yeah, and I will say the trip to Indiana was not a total waste, because the Bulls shot around at historic Hinkle Fieldhouse on the Butler campus yesterday. And I talked to Taylor Horton-Tucker after that shoot around, and just, you make a good point. I mean, he was not even guaranteed a roster spot coming into training camp. And then for him to not only win that roster spot, but now turn a non-guaranteed contract into a guaranteed deal, meaning, he'll be here unless he's traded for the rest of the season in his hometown. I mean, he talked about just what it has meant to him this season to kind of try to reclaim his career in his hometown. So really, really great story. I talked about this on the game broadcast last night, but really great story. And then real quickly, circling back to Hinkle, I mean, you know those certain gyms that you walk into in the country. I mean, we've all been there. There's certain ones you walk in and you're just like, wow, I've been to Hinkle before. I hadn't been there in over a decade. And you walk in and, I mean, it's just a different barn. The natural light is coming in, and it just has that feel of heft and history to it, man. And I will say, like, the Bulls were actually in a side gym because there was a women's game last night, Butler women's game last night. So I believe it was Providence, the visitors. They were having shoot around in the main gym. But players were actually leaving the side gym to go look at the main gym. And I mean, for NBA players to, go back to their roots and Hoosiers.
Yeah.
I mean, Vooch went over there and looked at it, a couple others. So it was pretty cool to see that kind of stuff, man.
Nice. I love that the guys know about just basketball history. And obviously, as you mentioned, the movie Hoosiers, and just thinking about, you talked about the natural light that's inside of Hinkle. I'm going back to 2007, my senior year at Southern Illinois. We actually played against Butler at Hinkle, and it was just a magical game. So I'm not trying to get too corny in this situation, but like you said, it's some of those gyms where you just walk in, you just feel the goosebumps. And that was us when we had our first, shoot around practice the day prior, and just seeing that natural light. I mean, it took us about 10 or 15 minutes, and I'm glad our coaching staff at the time, Chris Lowry, who's the head coach, is now an assistant at Northwestern under Chris Collins and that staff. But he allowed us as players just to walk around, shoot around, have these stories, like relive some of those moments from the movie Hoosiers. And there's something basketball godly about that light shining into the arena and just having it hit you. And it was the same thing when we played against Butler. And at the time, it was the Bracket Buster game on ESPN, where both of our teams, SIU and Butler, were ranked in the top 15 respectively. And so it was a great night. That transition from being there late afternoon where the sun was still coming in, and then it transitioning to night, it was great. And then also it makes it even better when you win. And that's what we did.
Well, I was going to say,
Butler. Yeah, we beat them.
Google, I just pulled up the score, 68-64. Is that right?
There we go. It was a slugfest, KC. My man Jamal Tatum went wild in the final moments, man. Like one of the best guards. Yeah, man. He was a lethal threat and could score at all three levels. So there's some highlights out there if you go on YouTube, and you'll see me. I didn't play as much, but you'll see me after Tatum makes some big shots, especially walking back to the bench. A young Cam Smith giving high fives, no beard, just fresh face, all of those different things. But the focus of a warrior as we tried to get that win against Butler, and we did. So I love that you brought that up, Casey. It was a great night, man. Great game, great night.
Well, here I am waxing pointing about Hinkle Fieldhouse, and you played there, so I should have stood out. That's impressive.
No, you're good, Casey. You're good. You know me. I'm humble. I just move in right away, man. And so I just speak my piece. But I love that KC definitely always comes with the knowledge and always just coming with the receipts. KC was like, wait a minute. All right, let me see if Cam remembers this.
I'm a reporter at heart. I need details. I need facts.
I know, and I am as well. So I had to make sure that obviously the facts, the details are all there, because Google is accessible to everyone, and especially you too. So like, if I'm out here fabricating a story, people will definitely be in my mentions and bringing me smoke there. But that's really cool that the Bulls players were able to just walk past and just look at the floor, just be inside of Hinkle, because it really is a magical place, man. Really is.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, before we wrap things up, KC, I'm looking ahead for the rest of the Bulls schedule. They have 5 games in the next 8 days, and one of the biggest games is going to be on Sunday back at the United Center when DeMar DeRozan makes his return. Debo will be back at the UC with the Sacramento Kings. So we touched on Debo and DeMar just a little bit early in the podcast, I'm sorry, and just what he was last year and what he was with the Bulls in his time in Chicago, and just the phenomenal on so many different levels, and just clutch. We've seen that. I think that for me personally, he should have won Clutch Player of the Year last year over Steph Curry, just seeing what he was able to do with the Bulls in those clutch moments. But when you think of DeMar and what he is as a player, but especially what he was as a Bull, what memories come about?
Well, I always got to go from the media standpoint, and I'll get a little bit in the weeds here and hopefully not bore listeners too much. There's actually an award. There's a Professional Basketball Writers Association, and I've been a member of it for over 2 decades. I'm actually on the board now as the treasurer, and there's an award given out called the Magic Johnson Award, which is given to the player every year who best combines on-court excellence with media and fan cooperation. And DeMar has won it before from when he was with the Toronto Raptors, and he was a finalist last year. And quite frankly, we joke amongst our membership, like he can win it every year. I mean, I come from things from a media perspective. I covered DeMar for 3 seasons. He did not say no to an interview request one time in 3 seasons. That includes pregame, shoot around, postgame, off day. He did not say no at one time. I mean, there is a trend now in the NBA where a lot of stars are off limits pregame. You could sit and talk in the locker room before a game with DeMar, not as long as you wanted, but a decent amount. The dude just respects what we do, loves talking ball, is a student of the game, is a student of the history of the game. He and I used to have a funny thing where I would come up to him. all right, you know, you got coming up tonight, because he's climbing up the all-time NBA scoring list. And I remember sitting with him in Indiana. It's funny because we were in Indiana last night. I remember sitting with him last year at a shoot-around at Gamebridge Fieldhouse and going, you know, who you got coming up tonight? He would never check. He left that up to me. It was like a running thing between us. He goes, no, who? I go, you got the Hoosier, Larry Bird. He's like, oh, he said, sorry, Andrew, might have to bleep that one out. But he was like, oh man, Larry Legend, that one's real. So I come in. I mean, everyone saw the encore brilliance, and hopefully I didn't bore listeners too much there. I have such respect for people that understand the role the media plays. We're conduit to the fans, and for DeMar to make himself available, and not only be available, but then be thoughtful and really intelligent with his responses. And again, a student of the game, the history of the game. Quite frankly, the Bulls benefited from him being here because we delivered more perspective and coverage because of DeMar DeRozan. So he'll get his flowers Sunday, not to the level Derek did, but he'll certainly get his flowers on Sunday, and they are well deserved. He was an exemplary player and citizen here for the Bulls for 3 seasons.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up, KC. And if you were bored by that, you shouldn't be. Like, stop it right now. That was great insight from KC Johnson, as we always get, because that's who DeMar was when he was in Chicago with the Bulls, and just who he is as an NBA player. Like, he's going to make sure that he takes time to speak with you and have that time. Obviously, the amount of time that you're allowed to sit down with DeMar, but just that insight is always cool. So I'll throw this out there for fans, and hopefully I won't bore them with this story that I have. But going back last year with the Bulls, it was you remember, KC, when the Bulls played the Knicks, I believe it was like a Friday, then they turned around and played them again on like a Monday or Tuesday towards the end of last season. And so the second time around when the Bulls were playing the Knicks, it was an off day for me. I was off the clock. So I decided to bring my wife and my son to the game. And so we're in the back tunnel. We're kind of finishing things up, and more so my wife and my son are waiting for me to stop talking and speaking to everybody back there. So they're finally ready. We walk out into the hallway right outside of the media room. And my son, who is one of the biggest DeMar DeRozan fans out there, and was so hurt when he found out the news, and I told him the news that DeMar was being traded to Sacramento. And he was like, it was so epic of the quote and his reaction, KC. And I'm going to quote my son. He was just like, when I told him DeMar was traded, he was like, DeMar? Oh, no, not my boy. So it was funny to that level. But getting back to that moment, post-game after the Knicks game at the UC, we walk out into the hallway, and DeMar simultaneously is walking past us, and my son is in front of me. And my son points up. He's like, Dad, look, there's DeMar right there. That's DeMar. And DeMar sees my son. He daps him up. And then he walks maybe about 5 or 10 more feet, and he stops. He turns around, KC, goes back to my son, puts his arm around him, and they just start walking down the hallway. And my son he has a future as a sports broadcaster, reporter, commentator. He knows stats, facts, everything. And they're just walking down the hallway towards the family area, just talking basketball. And my wife and I are smiling like, oh man, that's so cool that he's having this moment. But then also too, like, wait a minute, man, you're not going home with DeMar and his family. You're going back home with us. So I'm like, we got to go. Like, thanks, DeMar. We appreciate it. But, you know, Caden, come on back, man. We got to get ready to go this way. But it's just those moments and just how gracious DeMar is with his time, with reporters, with fans, just everyone in the city of Chicago. That's why he's so beloved in the city now. But I'm for sure knowing that he's going to have a standing ovation at the United Center when that video tribute is given to DeMar. And, you know, he does some DeMar things. So shout out to DeMar DeRozan. Debo, tuck your chains in because he's coming on Sunday. It'll be an interesting game for the Bulls on Sunday. But before that, they have the Washington Wizards. Another opportunity, KC, to get their lick back against the Wizards on Friday night at the UC. But it's going to start a stretch for the Bulls where I believe it's going to be 5 straight home games for this team.
Season high homestand,
yep.
5 games.
Yep. So they get that done, and before they hit the road, they hit the West Coast. So some great opportunity for them to bounce themselves back. But for sure, all eyes will be on Sunday against the Sacramento Kings when DeMar DeRozan returns at the UC. I believe the tip time is at 2:30 p.m. So make sure you're in the building. I know I'll be in the building to just, you know, be there and have those conversations with Demar and just, shower him with the praise that, we all have throughout the years. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of the By the Horns podcast. For my man, K.C. Johnson, I'm Cam Smith. We appreciate you checking in with us and know that By the Horns is presented by Toyota, and Toyota has more all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive vehicles than any other brand. So find yours and shine on. Toyota, let's go places. We'll see everybody soon. Take care.